Most of my colour is defined in the lighting when I'm shooting. So whether I'm filming outdoors and I shoot a particular time of day, or I'm indoors and I'm lighting and the type of light that I'm adding to it, that's where my colour will come to. Also the palette, what people are wearing and any of the props. When it comes to the grade, especially when it goes to sort of broadcast, it's very standard, let's say. It's less stylized. You know, you're doing a documentary for the BBC and they're not going to want it to look stylized. They're going to want it to still look nice, but look very, Rec 7090. That's kind of the look that they're going to go for, which is fine. But my own stuff does tend to be a bit more stylized. I do like something that looks.
Healthy, vibrant, naturalistic style, and that's your job done, really. I think as long as the continuity is there and the client is happy with the look that you've ended up with, I think you're safe to move on and you've done a good job. But occasionally you get clients who they have a set look that they want implemented. I've had clients come to me with creative LUTs that they themselves have built that they want me to use as a starting point, which is interesting and a good experience. I've also had situations where the editor has done their own grade and then sent me that as a reference to work from, and they've told me that the director has signed that off or people are happy. It does depend on how big the production is and how used to kind of working with colorists, directors and DPs are. One thing that you might find is that when you're working with your own stuff that you feel like, well, you're unencumbered, then it's up to you to produce this look and you can have fun and you can go to town, and that's really great. So what this lesson is about is ways that you can quickly add creative looks using things like creative LUTs, what the difference is between a creative LUT and a technical LUT and what order you should use them in, but also some tips on how to kind of just let loose a little bit and how to explore a look and go searching for a look, because particularly when it's your own project, it's not always going to be the case that something has become defined in pre-production and you followed it. Sometimes you do get into post and then you start thinking about something that you might want to do creatively, and it might not be that you have a clear idea going in, but it might be as you're editing it you develop a feeling for how you think it might want it to progress later on. So developing a look is a fun process, but there are a few tips that I can show you to kind of send you off in the right direction and hopefully get you with an end result that you're really happy with. So the first thing that I'm going to show you is how you can use a creative LUT. I'm actually going to be using DeLUTs, which are a package of creative LUTs made by James Miller. And I know James puts an awful lot of effort into the creation of these LUTs, and there's a good wide variety of them as well. So I've brought these in to Resolve, and I'm just going to have a little look at some of the different options that are in there and just show you how you can apply them.
I have used creative LUTs on a couple of occasions, particularly when we've had something that's maybe a little bit longer and we've wanted to give it a little bit of a look. Actually, the one that springs to mind straight away was the Jaguar F-Pace commercial, behind the scenes. We used the creative LUT on that, and it gave me a really nice starting point to work my way through to create something. I didn't, because it was a behind the scenes, I don't think it should be shot the same as, it should have the same look as the actual commercial. So I felt that we could be a little bit sort of, make it a bit more surreal. And that was a creative LUT, because if I'd built something by hand and found the look that they had, I think I would have been there for too long. This applied across all of the shots quite nicely, and there was a lot of shots in there. So in terms of my color grading, it saved a lot of time.
So I'm just using a frame grab from a music video shoot that a friend of mine recently brought to me and asked me to colour. He's actually the DP on the project, a DP called Jamie Harding, and he's shot this for director Theo Watkins, and I'm going to be sitting with both of them grading this in the coming weeks. But they've kindly said that I can use some of this footage in this course to have a little play around with and show you what can be done. So this is a music video. This chap's name is Archie Foulkes. He's a musician from London, and this was shot in Oxford, I believe, in a school gym, like an old school gym. There was dancers, and there was half shot on Super 16, half shot on Aria Mira, which is where this shot comes from. So it's log C, and I'm going to start off by just chucking a LUT on straight away. I'm literally just going to start off by just right-clicking, coming into LUTs, 3D LUT, coming into my DeLUTs folder. There's a wide range here. and I'm just going to choose one at random. Let's go with Wakefield. That seems appropriate. And this is the LUT. So that's it, that's been applied, or is it the end of it? I think you have to be careful with creative LUTs. Don't feel like you can just throw them onto your raw footage and it's going to end up, particularly if you think it's going to end up how maybe it looked when you were viewing them on their website before you purchased them. You've got to understand that it doesn't know what you're feeding into it. That's the limitation of LUTs. They have no idea what's coming in. They are simple transforms from one state to another. And so if you feed it exactly in terms of tonality, gamma, and white balance, you feed it exactly what it was being fed when that LUT was created, then you should be able to do a transform from one state to another, which comes out exactly how you're expecting. But if you're not, and you almost certainly are not going to be doing that with a creative LUT, then there is an element of unknown as to which way it's going to go. But you should see fundamental things like tints to shadows and tints to highlights and general spread of contrast should head off in that right direction. The best bit of advice I can give you is to make sure that before you just go ahead and chuck on a LUT like I've just done, is actually do a technical grade underneath it. Get your contrast and colours looking roughly what you want, or at least neutral based on the footage that you've got. Then apply the LUT, the creative LUT, and then actually in between the two create a new node where you make small tweaks. So you've essentially got a neutralized image, the creative LUT applied, and then an extra opportunity in the middle there to actually tweak and make it fit to make sure your highlights aren't clipped. It might be that this LUT pushes up the gamma quite high and that throws out your highlights. You just don't know. So stick those on, and if you stick to that simple kind of structure, then you should be able to tease out something that you're really happy with. So the first step then for me is to do a simple corrective pass here. I'm just going to bring my shadows down. I'm going to bring my highlights up, which is about there's some slight sort of specular highlights there. Just bring up his face there a little bit, drop the shadows down. So I'm not trying to do anything creative because I'm hoping that the LUT will do a lot of that for me. I'm just trying to get it into a slightly less log opening position, and that kind of fits the bill. I'm not going to touch hue or saturation or anything like that because I kind of want to see what the colours of the LUT are going to allow it to do. I want to keep it so that I'm feeding in something that's relatively untainted, but as I say, the contrast is roughly in the right place. And I'm going to create an extra node, and this is where my LUT's going to go. So I'm going to go in right-click LUT, 3D LUTs. Let's go into LUTs, and let's apply my Wakefield. Just go with that one again. And then you can see that that has done some potential damage to my highlights here. And you can't blame it. It doesn't know what it's being fed. It just knows to go from this value to this value. So I'm going to create a node before this one. Okay, so I've got my neutral start, my kind of technical grade, if you like. I've got my creative LUT at the end, and this is my opportunity to tweak slightly. So I'm just going to bring those highlights back a bit. Try and rescue the skin. Let's pull this down a little bit more. And that's fine. All I'm doing really, I don't want to destroy. So I can actually see that if we go back to before, so this is what the LUT was doing. This is with the LUT off. Okay. So as I bring that LUT on, I can see it's lifting up my blacks. I can see in the scopes, if I make that full screen for you, I can see in the scopes it lifting up those blacks. Okay, you can see it's pushing it, it's squishing up, it's actually stretching the contrast and pushing up, and I think most creative LUTs do something along the lines of that. There aren't many creative LUTs that compress contrast. They tend to veer towards this, so that you can see it's stretching up the highs, but it's also slightly lifting up the blacks. Now that's causing a problem for my highlights, and that's why this node is then solving that and bringing them back down. But at the same time, I'm making sure that the intention of the creative LUT, and when James created that, in terms of what it's doing with the shadows, are respected, because sure, there's no point doing it otherwise. You may as well just do this from scratch, which in fact is what I'll show you how to do in a minute. So we're kind of going from this to this. This is essentially my technical grade, my LUT, which is pushing the colors and saturation around and the contrast. And then I'm just using this as just to make a slight adjustment so that it works based on what I've actually got feeding into it. And it's a look. Is it the look I want? Well, who knows? I think if you're doing this for yourself, you don't necessarily know what you want, then you're going to have to keep experimenting and keep kind of going through and auditioning different things. And if you maintain this node structure like this, and you can just swap out this LUT. So if I come into here, I'm going to right click, LUTs, 3D LUTs, Deluxe. Let's try a different one. Let's try Worcester. Okay, so we can see that this is actually bringing down my mids a lot more. It's now quite grey, but these elevated blacks. It's kind of brought down the highs a little bit. It's very different to the way it was before. What I can do is I can create extra versions. So this could be my Wakefield version, and then let's go and reapply my Worcester, and this can be my previous version. I can just compare the two and go back and forth. I can even use my split screen up here and tell it to do versions and original. And what's nice about that is I can actually bring that up and I can see the original. I can see my another version that I've created earlier on. I can see my two creative LUTs. So this is kind of like a creative look that I've created. There's the creative look that's been applied from the Wakefield LUT that we applied first. And then this is another creative look that has been developed with a Worcester LUT. So this is a second LUT. And I can keep going and I can keep trying them. And this is nice for clients. You can sit and they can look at these and they can go, okay, well, maybe let's split the difference between those two. I quite like the way that's going. I think actually I really quite like the Wakefield look, but maybe with a bit of the saturation that we've got in an earlier look that I produced. So we can come back out of this, create a new node at the end here. Let's cool off these shadows and let's bring up the saturation a bit. Maybe add a little bit more red in there as well. So we can just slightly tweak, so we can take some of the sort of saturation that we liked from the other version. So we're kind of prototyping, if you like. We're going through several different stages of trying out things, and that creative LUT kind of forms the basis, but we're tweaking both before it and after it. So it's almost like you end up with two technical LUTs and then two creative LUTs, or potentially even more. But we've got the first one that gets us from log to something that's approaching kind of a normal linear kind of gamma. We've then got the creative LUT after that. We then add a node before that to sit in between those two that helps bring in, from a technical point of view, bring shadows and highlights back where they need to be, and then go and create one after the LUT to tweak slightly if there's things about the LUT that we want to slightly change. It's a bit back and forth, but it is the best approach to kind of getting the image that you want out of the LUT come the end. Another thing you could do is you could approach this final node as a group node or a timeline node, and that way you could apply like a final tweak to everything at the same time. This doesn't replace continuity, okay? I want to stress that it's still important that you do your primary balance and that you do your secondary work and that you do your continuity work before you start thinking about these creative LUTs and any kind of creative look that you might be pushing in. But if you're at that stage, then this is a good way of working.
When we shot the Canon C300 Mark II film, which was shot in Mykonos in Greece, we had the first C300 Mark II, I think, that had sort of ever been used in anger. It arrived the morning of the shoot in a brown paper bag at Mykonos airport. We didn't know what it was going to look like, didn't know what it could do. And by that afternoon, we were shooting with it. When you get there, the colours, and we had talent and we had whites and we had all of this, and I wanted to make it a little bit more surreal and show what the camera could do in terms of pushing and pulling and colour shifting, and we went for a slightly, a little bit more off Richter in terms of everything. We pushed the blues towards the cyany colour, not the true blues that were there. We made the skin tones a little bit paler probably than the talent had. I felt it was a really nice look, but I wanted to make it a little bit more of an arty piece because it was a story, it was an art storyline. It was a film that we literally had to write as we went along because we didn't know what the camera could do. We thought, well, let's push the grade. And I felt the stylized look sort of brought out the narrative more because what it did was it added to the pictures, and the pictures were really the narrative. There was no audio in it. It was just music. And it was really a girl walking from one end of Mykonos to the other. I mean, that was as simple as what the story was. So, we needed to tell it through the colours so what we decided to do was, I guess, turn it towards a bit more of the feel of a cosmetics or a perfume ad. And I mean, their colours are always, rich and beautiful. And so we use the colours to tell the story.
when you're working with a lot of creative LUTs and you're wanting to quickly see which ones are kind of already going to get you somewhere near where you think you might want to go, you just want to audition different ones. In DaVinci Resolve 15, there is a LUT preview area. So it allows you to load up a folder of LUTs. So, there's different built-in ones, and I've got these deluxe ones here. And I can come through and I can literally just play through them. So if I just skim over the top of them, it applies them to the footage that I've got. So I can see what Norwich looks like. I can see what Preston looks like. Here's Wakefield, which is the one that I applied a moment ago. Winchester, Worcester. Wolverhampton's nice, actually. Yeah, that's interesting. Just discovered one I quite like. So there you go. I've just gone and auditioned through about 6 or 7 of them and actually spotted that Wolverhampton one seems to work really. I like what it's doing with the blues, actually, in the shadows. And it seems like, apart from a little bit of highlight problems there, which I might just need to tidy up in a node before this, it looks like it's quite near there. So if you want to quickly go through and look at it, then I think something where you can preview multiple LUTs all in one quick smooth interface, then that does help you make your decisions much quicker. Otherwise you have to right click, go and apply that LUT, see what it looks like, come back out, go through, right click and keep doing it. So this is a great new feature in Resolve 15.
The look that you create and the color that you apply, it doesn't feel right that you apply the same look on everything that you do. So really, I think there are certain sensibilities that come through that make my work recognizable, but that's not something I'm actively trying to do project to project. Working in color and working in, what you can achieve with color, there's such potential that I think, each project should be pushed in ways that feel right creatively.
I'm going to close this LUT preview window now, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to build up my own look. As great as creative LUTs are, they do require almost as much work, if not sometimes more work, than it would have done if you'd just kind of started out from scratch with your own creative foundations here. So don't feel like creative LUTs are going to save you time. They almost never do, actually. Creating your own look is an alternative method which will allow you to kind of work, particularly if you've got your client with you, sort of straight off the bat towards what they're trying to achieve. And you can do all of this work after the continuity is done, okay? So I'm going to quickly apply the grade that we had before. So this is my correction. There we go. So I'm just going to quickly do a technical node just here to get this contrast in the right general area. Just get the saturation up a little bit. Let's just add a tiny bit more magenta into that and a little bit more contrast. There we go. So this is roughly where I want my starting point. I can't leave it alone now. There we go. So this is kind of, if you like, my broad primary grade done. So now that I've built that, and let's presume that I've now gone through and I've made sure that all other shots that look like this in this music video are matched, and I've done my continuity pass. Now I'm going to build my creative look on top of that. When you're building a creative look from scratch, and particularly if it's your own work and you're thinking about sort of experimenting and trying out different things, there are a few kind of rules, and there are also a few kind of things that I would recommend that you do which kind of go against the rules. So let's kind of tackle them in order. First of all, break it. And I know that sounds stupid, but it's a really good idea to just create a new node and just see what happens if you mess around with it. So I've just whacked up my gamma, and what I can tell is that my image is standing up really well to that. I mean, this is a ProRes 4x4 clip. I'm surprised at how much detail it's putting into that, but it does reveal an awful lot of noise in the shadows. If I push it, I'm really pushing it too hard, but that's what I want. I want to try and break it. Let's just push these highlights out. Let's really whack up the saturation. I'm deliberately testing limits, so you can really see now it's just kind of going to hell. Particularly in those shadow areas, I've just got this very red noise that's starting to appear, and that's useful. That's really useful for me to kind of think about the limits. I'm pushing the boundaries of this clip and trying to see where things kind of fall. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to disable that and create a new node, and then try and just ease up to that. So I was surprised at how far I could get with my gamma. And let me just bring down these shadows again in a slightly more intelligent way. Now that is much more contrasty. It was the saturation where things started to go really wrong. I'm going to keep the saturation a little lower. Maybe take some of this out here. So that's starting to kind of interest me because that is my technical grade, and this is kind of like a really vivid, quite punchy second node. It's an interesting one. It's definitely working. It's not wrong. Is it what my client wants? I don't know. I mean, by this point, hopefully I would have worked with them enough to kind of get a vibe and from their brief know what they kind of want. But it's definitely something to kind of bag. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to grab a still of that. And what's good about Resolve is each of those stills actually contains the node graph that I've just produced. So the grade is actually encapsulated inside that still, so that if later on I want to recreate that, I don't have to do it by eye. I can just apply that grade directly from that node onto the other clip. In other programs, you can just copy and paste, or in Final Cut Pro 10, you can save as a color preset, which does exactly the same thing. But that's just one look for me to try out. If you struggle to kind of think of things off the top of your head and you need some inspiration, there's no better step than just going out there and looking at films and even doing Google image searches for films that you like or even genres that you like and just seeing what comes back. You know, just try and find inspiration in films that you like and then try and match them. You know, take a screenshot and bring it in as a clip inside Resolve or inside Premiere or Final Cut, whatever you're using, and just think, you know, what is different about it? And it's a really good practice, actually. Over time, you can really develop a really honed technique for picking apart imagery and, you know, what is it about that I like? What's going on in the shadows? What's going in the highlights? Is the saturation high or low? And, you know, get it in and look at it on the scopes, and it'll reveal what's going on. Like, oh, all right, I didn't think that there was a tint in the shadows, but actually I can see on the scopes there's blue in there, and maybe that's what's playing nice. And let's maybe try that on this and see what that looks like. So I think we can learn an awful lot, obviously, by being inspired by the work, but we can take that a step further and don't feel like it's kind of shameless copying. I think it's good practice just to grab some references from elsewhere and just try and match them and just see what it looks like. So hue versus hue and you know, your brightness contrast, using your scopes, they're all ways that you can try and match things and do image wipes and split screens and try and make your image look like that. And, you know, how does it look? If it's something that you want to bag, then right click, save it as a still. Or another thing that you can do very easily is just right click and generate a 3D LUT. So you can generate your own LUT, your own creative LUT, and you can come up with your own clever name for it. Maybe I'll call mine the Kensington LUT. And I can stick it and save it and apply it and use it time and time again. Just bear in mind all the things I said before, that LUT is based on what I'm currently using to generate it, and that may not work for something else on another time and another situation. So there's a number of different approaches that you can take when you're building your own creative looks, but the techniques are pretty familiar to you from grading normally. The important thing to remember, though, with LUTs is that secondaries won't come along in a LUT. Okay, a LUT can only contain basic kind of master color corrections and primary corrections. So do as much as you can with the basic tools, because you want to get as close to what you want and create as close to that creative vision as you're after, but in as simple a way as possible. Both because you can't contain secondaries inside LUTs, so when you create a LUT from this, it's not going to be able to contain more complex changes, but also just in terms of recreating it, and for continuity's sake, it can be an absolute nightmare trying to, you know, you've done a 20 node tree to get a look that you're after. That's going to be a real problem to try and recreate later on, let alone, you know, get into a LUT, which you just won't be able to do necessarily. So you need to keep it simple and try and seek out the thing in the image, the creative kind of angle that you're going for. Try and get there as quickly as possible and as fewer moves as possible. And you can always work on it to your heart's content later on once you know and have decided on the look that you're after.
When I got the ability to actually start colouring, which was with my first NLE, which was Media Composer from Avid, I was able to do some actual grading. And initially I was making things very contrasty and overly saturated, and then I wanted to then lift my black levels and change things around. I go through phases with my colouring. I go through a phase where everything has a certain look, then I get very bored of it, and then I do something different. It's when I go back and look at my older stuff, my own personal projects, say when I used to use Magic Bullet looks, I'm like, oh my God. And I have, on a number of projects, gone back to my Final Cut 7 projects and regraded them because my tastes have changed.
Another big tip is just be prepared to start again. It's not the end of the world. You know, if you work quickly, you can try things out quickly. And so you can just rip things up and start again. And that's good, you know. Another thing would be just to walk away occasionally. Just go and have lunch and come back, grab a coffee and come back. And that will allow you to kind of clear your mind, clear your eyes, let your eyes kind of reset and then get back to it. And you kind of look at it and go, oh, what was I thinking? Or, oh, you know, yeah, this looks good. It feels kind of familiar and comfortable. So I would say whenever you're doing any kind of colour grading, if you find yourself battling for something, just step away from it, come back to it and see if things kind of resolve themselves. Certainly you'll come back with a fresher frame of mind, that's for sure.
I think it's really important when you're grading to keep looking back at your original image just to see how far you've pushed it. Because more often than not, you've gone too far and you do tend to need to dial it back a bit. Especially if you're trying to get something a little bit more stylized. I think it's less is more.
If the vision you've got for the color grade doesn't really match the footage you've shot, you can't really force that on it. So I think it's a balancing act to make sure to get that vision into the footage, but working with the material that you've got to make the best of it that you can.
Another thing to check for is, you know, has your creative look that you're pushing in now screwed up your continuity, or has it absolutely ruined your skin tones? Or, you know, was your client right from the outset adamant that they wanted nice clean blacks and everything you've just done has ruined that as well? You know, check that you're not introducing problems that are then going to be a nightmare to recreate when you're doing your continuity as you push this look across the rest of your project. Otherwise, you're going to end up in a real hole. So this kind of work is fine, but try and protect areas that need protecting. And I'd say skin tones are one of those areas that will probably need a certain level of protection, be that with masks or keys or however you choose to work. Each time you're trying something out new, don't forget that you need to keep that initial corrective node. If you strip it back to before your technical grade, then you're going to lose that continuity that you had as you went into this, and as it's going to all unravel, and you're going to find yourself chasing clips around, and it's not fun. Trust me, it's not a good situation to be in. I think too, we should always be mindful of our subject. You know, Archie, this is his music video, this is about him. Is my grade getting in the way of that? If my work is getting in the way of the song or the narrative, if it's a drama, then you failed. So you need to make sure that you're constantly conscious of that too. If it is, then don't forget you can always use your node key just to rein that back in. You can just take out some of the opacity of that correction and just try and ease it back off. Maybe it just doesn't quite feel right. Maybe I'm happy generally with where it's going, but I want to just try it at half power. That actually looks really nice. So by easing off, you know, even if you do like it, it turns out, even if you do like it, just ease off and just see what happens, see where you end up. You know, this is why every single effect, whenever you apply it in any editing package or color grading package, there's always a blend or a mix parameter. It's because sometimes things kind of look good, but as you ease them off, they integrate better and you end up with a more natural kind of finish. So it's worth trying that as well. One thing I particularly like at the moment, and something that I've seen done well by colorists that I admire, people like Toby Tompkins and Dan Moran in this country, there is this kind of yellow and teal look. It's kind of a variation on orange and teal, and it actually, this clip lends itself to it quite well. So I might, with this one, I might try using some hue versus hue and hue versus sat controls just to try and bend my colors in a certain direction. So we've got some blue in the sky. Let's just select that and just try and head that off towards more towards teal. So I'm actually just pushing it round there. Let's try and do that with it. So I can push those round. And let's select these warmer colors. Let's just try and move those around more towards yellow. In fact, let's try and move the bulk of this more towards yellow. There we go. That looks kind of interesting. Let's boost the saturation for teal, which kind of sits in this kind of area. Let's just pull it away from the rest here. And we can try and kind of push things around. Another thing I'm going to try and do is just with my log controls is just try and pull this up here. Let's try and shift the weight of it across there. So let's do the same with our highlights. So this is getting quite brutal now, but who knows? I'm quite liking it actually. So that's really changing things, and I'm letting those. Let's just do one more little change here. Just going to angle that around. So I'm just actually starting to push those warmer colours in the highlights more around towards yellow and less sort of orangey. And I'm actually pushed quite a lot of colour, teal colour, into the shadows. And it's actually had quite a nice impact on the skin tones. If it hadn't have done, then what I could do is I could key the skin out and allow that just to happen around the skin and leave the skin alone. But there's definitely some sort of movement in a direction that I quite like there. But, you know, look at established colour techniques, look at orange and teal, and keep on top of current trends. You know, yellow and teal is a current trend. It's something that we've seen in a lot of TV at the moment. And if you kind of keep on top of it and kind of keep researching, this is kind of your field of research, if you like. It's a great way to keep current and keep a good, you know, modern, fresh appeal to your work and make you more bankable, more credible, and also you're more likely to get work. One last look that you might want to try is a black and white look. It's not something that you do very often, but if you are thinking of doing black and white, it's a really good idea to come into the RGB mixer and just turn on monochrome. Most people would just turn the saturation down, but the nice thing about going into the monochrome mode is you can then directly influence the brightness of each channel's output. So I can up my reds. So because there's quite a lot of red in this particular image, you can see that that's having quite a major impact on the overall look of it. I can impact the brightness of my green. So actually that's adding a little bit of contrast into the lights on the background of this, and then I can raise and lower my black. So actually that does something interesting there. So I can alter my red, green and blue output. Another thing that I can do is if I uncheck my preserve luminance, is I can have a more drastic effect here. So as we talked about before, when you change the red, green and blue channels, there's an impact on the brightness of it. By unchecking the preserve luminance button, I can take that away and I can actually just individually focus on how bright each of those channels are. So I'm going to bring that down quite low. This green is really helping with those highlights in the background. And that's now clipping, so let's just bring that around about there. I can adjust the contrast as well. And it's always good to adjust the contrast and then just use the pivot. The pivot will push up the S-curve or down the S-curve, so it changes the point at which you transition from the bottom half of the S to the top half of the S, and you can see it's either pushing up to the highlights or down to the shadows. And a little bit of mid-tone detail, just going to actually take that away a little bit. And we've got quite an interesting look going on there. Who knows? It might be an option. I mean, black and white is, particularly in music videos, is something that seems to be becoming more popular. Again, I think it's slightly retro, so I think that's why it's kind of popular at the moment. I think it would be a shame with this particular music video because it was shot on film, and a lot of that was because of the colours of film, particularly in the reds. But that's how I would approach doing a monochromatic black and white look for a film that I might be working on. So remember to have fun with this. This is a great kind of opportunity to really try things out. But don't go off the deep end with this. You are going to have to rein it in at some point, and your client won't thank you if you've spent half an hour chasing some look that takes 15 nodes to reproduce, and you've then had a massive knock-on effect on how long the rest of the grade is going to take. But if you can work and prototype quickly like this, present them with options, then they're going to love you for that, and they're going to keep